that was certainly perhaps not the best Jedi team that they that they left on that planet.
Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So I've kind of kept this quiet. I've not really spoken about this because I was waiting to drop this video pretty much as a surprise, a little treat. I got the privilege of asking Sam Witwer a few questions. Now, you're probably very familiar with Sam, and he needs no introduction, but just to honour such an amazing human being and one of the most incredible veterans at Lucasfilm, he of course is the face, the likeness, and the voice of Starkiller from the Force Unleashed games. He is Darth Maul in the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. He also voices the Sun. But aside from his accolades, he is also contacted frequently by Lucasfilm for his opinions, his creative input, and recently on the Katie Sackhoff podcast, he kind of alluded to the fact he might be coming back to Star Wars for a secret role. Some fans have been speculating, could we see Maul again in animated form before his death at the hands of Obi-Wan? You know, there was a rumoured Maul animated project a few years ago, and nothing came of that, did it? Or maybe he's in Ahsoka Season 2, I don't know. But one of the most incredible things about him is that he's a lifelong Star Wars fan, and he's worked very closely with Dave Filoni, but more importantly, George Lucas. He knows so much about the ins and outs of Lucasfilm, the history of the studio, he's a lore expert, and you can talk to him for hours about his incredible Star Wars knowledge, opinions. He's just fantastic. And I got the opportunity to ask him a couple of questions and to really pick his brain about some recent projects, but also some of his favourite moments in Star Wars. And more than anything, I wanted to ask him about the Acolyte. This is someone who knows a lot about the history of the Jedi. He's passionate about them. He's very Lucas-esque in his knowledge of the intention of the Star Wars story, how George Lucas envisioned things. He's also a big Expanded Universe fan. He loved Tales of the Jedi, the original Tales of the Jedi comics. And so, in light of that, I asked him, how did you feel about the handling of the Jedi and the Sith? And how do you feel about the controversy that a lot of fans didn't like the show? He was very diplomatic, and while he was more reserved on his own personal opinion on the overall series, he makes it a point, and this is a philosophy I subscribe to in this community, that we should respect the opinions of other fans. Even if we don't like something, we shouldn't put others down for liking that thing. I was not a fan of the Acolyte, you guys know this, but if you were, you have a place here on my channel, in this amazing community, because at the end of the day, we all have Star Wars projects that speak to us, that might not speak to every kind of fan, but the way Star Wars has affected all of our lives is so unique to our experience, where we were, who we watched Star Wars with, the Star Wars films that we loved, the series. For example, I'm a huge Star Wars Rebels fan, and while I also love The Bad Batch and the Clone Wars, there are fans out there who say I'm crazy. Some people just don't get it, and as long as they're respectful to me, I respect their opinion, they respect mine, we're still Star Wars fans. It's the same with the Acolyte. I vehemently disagreed with so many creative choices by Leslye Headland, but that doesn't mean if you're an Acolyte fan, you're not a Star Wars fan. It just means that's your cup of tea. That's art that speaks to you. And I'm saying all of this as a preface to the video because it's an important message, but I found his comments super insightful, so I'm going to play you the conversation. It's a lot of fun. I also was able to ask him about Ahsoka. He kind of teases some things with Shin, and of course I had to ask him about my favourite Jedi Yaddle, but I'm going to leave that for a separate video, my dear friends, so look out for that. But first, what were Sam Witwer's thoughts on the Acolyte?
Look, I think people make too much of this, my Star Wars is better than your Star Wars thing. I think people need to just be on their own and decide what they think about the things that they see, because I know that some people really loved Acolyte. Why would we want to take that away from them? Right? I'm a big Willow fan, right? Like, if someone tells me, well, you shouldn't be, I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know if you noticed, their lightsabers are thicker and bulkier and a little bit clumsier. I didn't really realize that at first until I took a closer look, and I was like, whoa, those things are, yeah, they're like older lightsabers. They weren't able to miniaturize them yet, quite. Because I'm a big fan of the old Tales of the Jedi with Ulick Qel-Droma, the comic books from the 90s and stuff like that. And they had a very different design aesthetic. But theirs took place thousands of years back, not just a few hundred, right? It looked very sort of Egyptian and primitive and very, very interesting. I like the design of the Acolyte. I like the look of the High Republic. Obviously the fights were fantastic. I loved the Cortosis references. In terms of how they handle the Jedi and the Sith, you know, it's open to interpretation. But But that was certainly perhaps not the best Jedi team that they that they left on that planet.
So that's basically the section on the Acolyte, and I really love how light-hearted he is about everything. And I've seen enough interviews with Sam to know by this point that even when he doesn't like a Star Wars project or has criticisms, he's gonna focus on the positives. And I have no doubts, despite the more positive spin he puts in his reply, that he took issue with quite a few things in the show. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I'm just saying, as someone who worked with George Lucas, I'm sure personally he has some critiques. But it says a lot that he doesn't want to take enjoyment away from other fans. At a time where things are very heated, not just in the fandom, but in the world generally, especially with the way social media is these days, it's good to hear different perspectives in a calm way. And I can't wait to share with you some of the other things he said. And when he was speaking to Katie Sackhoff the other day, he brought up a poignant argument. Star Wars often ages better with time. He specifically mentioned it in the context of the sequel trilogy and The Last Jedi. Anything is possible, but I don't think it's going to see the same amount of love that the prequel trilogy saw. The argument goes that because there is a newfound appreciation for the prequels, the same is going to be true of the sequel trilogy. I have no doubts, especially with generations to come, that there will be fans where the sequel trilogy is their entry point. But in terms of comparing it to the prequels and the prequel situation, I don't think you can compare the two. Pretending the problems of both trilogies are equatable, to my mind, is inaccurate. I'm a prequel fan. I grew up with episodes 1, 2 and 3, so obviously I didn't have the same issues that original trilogy fans had when those came out. But I acknowledge them, and the problems the prequel trilogy had were not as monumental as the sequels, because talk about wooden dialogue, talk about comic relief, talk about maybe missed opportunities going too far back in The Phantom Menace, not showing us any of the Clone Wars, having to fill that in an animated show between episodes 2 and 3, etc, etc. None of that is as jarring as the structural issues of 7, 8 and 9. Say what you will about the prequel trilogy, George Lucas was ahead of his time. They were still revolutionary movies, with some of the best written characters I think in all of cinema. Fans will say, well, it's not as good as the original trilogy. I guess that's bias. It was my generation. Just as there are sequel fans, where those movies are their generation. But I can't see 7, 8 and 9 having the same amount of resurgent love as episodes 1 to 3. So will fans look at The Acolyte or The Last Jedi 10 years down the line and say, well, you know what, this is much better than fans gave it credit for? My personal prediction is no. For me, a show like The Acolyte is pretty unsalvageable, but who knows? I could be very wrong. But I'm so glad Sam Witwer responded to me and answered my questions. And it's interesting hearing some of these people who worked alongside George Lucas to hear their opinions on things. I know Sam is still involved with modern Lucasfilm, so maybe there are things he can't really say or talk about, but in the context of him saying it was a Jedi team that was maybe not best suited for that mission, I couldn't agree more.